113 years after the sinking of the R.M.S. Titanic, a number of mysteries still remain about what exactly happened that night. How did Captain Smith finally meet his end? Was it a weakness in Titanic's riveted plates that caused the ship to break apart? What was the precise nature of the damage done by the iceberg? For all that we've learned over the years, these and other fascinating questions remain. There's also a bit of mystery about the ending of James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster film about the Titanic tragedy, and that will be the subject of this video. Cameron, of course, tells the story of Titanic through the eyes of 100-year-old Rose DeWitt Bucator, who boarded Titanic at the age of 17 and during the course of the journey fell in love with a young man named Jack Dawson, much to the chagrin of her uptight mother and her loathsome fiancé. At the end of the film, having told her tale, Rose retires to her stateroom, where we see her apparently asleep beside a table adorned with various photos of her life. With a final shot on Rose, Cameron plunges us down to the wreck of Titanic, and as we cross over the forecastle and into the bulk of the ship, it begins to undergo a dramatic change. We see Titanic restored from ruin to her former beauty, and then we're quickly ushered into the presence of Titanic's passengers and crew, notably assembled here in spite of their class differences. At a landing on the grand staircase stands Jack Dawson, who turns to greet Rose, now 17, once again, and they embrace as Titanic's passengers and crew applaud, with Captain Smith himself adding the final approval. Ever since this film debuted, viewers have been asking one question about this ending sequence. Is Rose merely asleep and dreaming here, or has she passed on into the afterlife? Now, very quickly, before I get into this, in spite of the film's popularity, I know that a great many people out there don't care for the relationship between Jack and Rose for several reasons, but I'm not here to get into that. As a lover of film storytelling and character analysis, I'm simply interested in the artistic choices that James Cameron made here and what we can potentially learn from them. I don't know Cameron personally, nor am I an expert on his films or his film technique, and I don't claim to have some sort of inside scoop into his thought process. I simply have what I believe is a plausible take on what he's doing here, and I offer it for whatever general interest it may have for my fellow story geeks out there. So, without further ado, let's get into it. When I first saw Titanic in the theater, I was of the opinion that Rose was simply asleep and dreaming during that final sequence. Upon subsequent viewings, however, and as an old Titanic buff, I've seen this movie many times, I noticed certain things that Cameron shows us, and equally importantly, how he shows them to us. I changed my mind, and am now firmly of the opinion that Rose has passed on and we're seeing her reception into the afterlife. In fact, I'll go a little further. I think Rose undertook this journey to the Titanic wreck site with more in mind than simply telling her story and seeing some recovered artifacts. I think that she intended for her life to end there. Now, Cameron himself has deliberately left the issue of Rose's fate vague, remarking that viewers can interpret the ending of the film however they choose. When I first became interested in this question, I thought I'd go to what seemed like the most logical place to look for answers, the film's screenplay. But it turns out that the screenplay is just as vague on this issue as Cameron himself. Here's what we get. Interior, Rose's cabin, Kildish. A graceful pan across Rose's shelf of carefully arranged pictures. Rose as a young actress in California, radiant. A theatrically lit studio publicity shot. Rose and her husband with their 2 children. Rose with her son at his college graduation. Rose with her children and grandchildren at her 70th birthday. A collage of images of a life lived well. The pan stops on an image-filling frame. Rose, circa 1920. She is at the beach, sitting on a horse at the surf line. The Santa Monica Pier with its roller coaster is behind her. She is grinning, full of life. We pan off the last picture to Rose herself, warm in her bunk. A profile shot. She is very still. She could be sleeping, or maybe something else. Cut to blackness. The wreck of Titanic looms like a ghost out of the dark. It is lit by a kind of moonlight, a light of the mind. We pass over the endless forecastle deck to the superstructure, moving faster than subs can move, almost like we are flying. We go inside, and the echoing sound of distant waltz music is heard. The rust fades away from the walls of the dark corridor, and it is transformed. We emerge into the grand staircase, lit by glowing chandelier. The music is vibrant now, and the room is populated by men in tie and tails, women in gowns. It is exquisitely beautiful. In point of view, we sweep down the staircase. The crowd of beautiful gentlemen and ladies turn as we descend toward them. At the bottom, a man stands with his back to us. He turns, and it is Jack. Smiling, he holds his hand out toward us. In a side angle, Rose goes into his arms, a girl of 17. The passengers, officers, and crew of the R.M.S. Titanic smile and applaud in the utter silence of the abyss. So as you can see here, the screenplay's ending could easily be interpreted either way, and if we're going to take a shot at answering the question, we'll have to come at it by other means. Once again, in that final sequence where we find Rose in her bed, we see that she's brought along a number of photos depicting various scenes in her life, including pictures with her family. Now, it would be easy to dismiss this as showcasing an old woman's eccentricities, and when I first saw it, I thought that it was a simple way for Cameron to show us a bit of Rose's life after Titanic, but I've since come to believe that there's more to it. To understand why, let's look at the sequence where Jack and Rose are clinging to a floating door, trying not to freeze to death while waiting for rescue. In this sequence, Jack makes Rose promise to live, and not only to live, but to go on and have a full life, complete with a family of her own, and predicting that, when she finally dies, she'll be an old woman warm in her bed. This is precisely what Cameron shows us in that ending sequence as the camera pans past Rose and her collection of photos. She has brought these along with her to the place where Jack died to show him that she kept her promise. She lived that full life that he wanted her to live. The sequence immediately prior to this also provides some clues. Alone on the deck of the Keldysh, Rose makes her way to the vessel's stern, where it's revealed that she still has the priceless blue diamond the treasure hunters have been looking for, the heart of the ocean. She might have sold the diamond, of course, and lived in luxury, but she's held on to it all of these years because it represents her love for Jack. Having carried it all this time, she now relinquishes it to the sea as she once relinquished Jack, watching it descend into the depths to the place where he himself rests. "I'll never let go," Rose tells Jack. "I promise." The fact that she now lets go of the only memento she has of him strongly suggests to me that she doesn't need it anymore. One could interpret this as Rose achieving a type of closure, but the sacredness of the promise she made to the young man she credits as having saved her life suggests to me that she has simply finished her course and anticipates being reunited with him. These are the main plot points that I find most suggestive when I say that I believe Rose dies and rejoins Jack in the afterlife at the end of Titanic, but I'll offer 3 other quick considerations here as well. When we come to the grand staircase and see Jack alive again on the otherworldly Titanic, we notice that the clock behind him is set to 2:20. This is the official time that Titanic sank, when the stern section finally slipped beneath the surface. Next, as I mentioned previously, when we enter the restored Titanic, we find a collection of its passengers and crew awaiting Rose's arrival together, gathered in one location in spite of their class distinctions. This is decidedly not something we would have seen in the world of 1912, and it brings to mind a theme as old as the oldest literature of mankind: death as the great equalizer, the force that ultimately brings both rich and poor alike to the same end. Lastly, and I admit that this may be stretching things a bit too far, rather than having Rose be reunited with Jack aboard the Titanic in some other dreamlike way, Cameron plunges us back to the wreck at the bottom of the ocean, and this suggests another theme to me. Throughout all of history, the dark abyss of the deep sea has been a symbol of chaos and death. In what is perhaps the oldest book of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Job, God rhetorically asks Job, "Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of deepest darkness?" In the book of Jonah, after he's expelled from the belly of the great fish, Jonah says to God, "I called out my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I called for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice, for you threw me into the deep, into the heart of the seas." Sheol is the Semitic underworld, the place where all departed spirits are gathered regardless of whatever station they may have held in life. Rose's plunge to the ruin of Titanic suggests a journey through a type of valley of the shadow, emerging into new life on the other side. Well, there you have it, my case for why Rose is dead rather than dreaming at the end of Titanic, and why that's probably the end she was hoping for all along. Agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments. If you're interested in more of the actual history of the Titanic tragedy and its lasting significance, you may enjoy my video on Walter Lord's classic book, A Night to Remember. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like, please consider subscribing to the channel, and I hope to see you next time. God bless.